Okay, so we are going to kick off then with our keynote speaker, who is Matt Carroll, who's somebody I know very well during his role with Football Australia. He's had a storied career in sports administration. He is currently the CEO of the Australian Olympic Committee. That's since 2017. Previously, he's been CEO of Australian Sailing, interim CEO, Rugby World Cup 2019 Japan. As I mentioned, General Manager A-League and Operations Football Federation Australia. He was General Manager at the Rugby World Cup 2003 in Australia. He was the CEO of the Waratahs of the New South Wales Rugby Union, and then the GM of the Australian Rugby Union. He is a member of the Order of Australia for services to the sport of rugby, and in particular hosting of the Rugby World Cup in 2003. Goodness me, Matt. I'm surprised you've got time for anything else in your life with all those things going on. Great to see you, mate.
Indeed.
Let's just kick off with a general sort of question as to how you got to where you are now, your sporting journey, if you like. I presume you were always passionate about sport when you were younger.
Well, yeah, I mean, I started off in the interesting world of construction. I did a building degree at New South Wales University. And then there was a recession we had to have, courtesy of the government at the time, back in the, obviously a long time before anyone probably else on the screens today. And Paul Keating was the Prime Minister at the time. So I was on the board of New South Wales Rugby at the time. They contracted me to do some work. They were based out of Concord in those days, and I stayed. Only there's a bit of a relationship between the world of construction and sport administration. It's organising things, getting stuff done, and making it happen for athletes, and the opportunities for spectators, fans and sponsors and media. So it's very similar in terms of project management of building buildings, is getting people together. Organising sport is getting people together. So I enjoyed it more than construction, and so 30 odd years later, I'm still here.
And doing a very good job, you are too. You're also, of course, on the board of directors of ACPE. So just explain a little bit as to why this relationship is important to you. Well,
I see, everyone always just thinks the Australian Olympic Committee just gets athletes to the games. And that's what, well, actually we do a broader scope there. Our objectives, which get handed down from the International Olympic Committee. There's only 2 of those about the games. The rest are about using sport for the benefit of the community, and encouraging the growth of sport, participation sport, high performance sport. So when the ACPE chair approached me to come onto the board, I saw it as an opportunity 2 ways. One, for me to learn about the education sector in sport, which I think is important for the AOC. And I'd always like to be able to make a contribution. And I see it being able to make a contribution. The next 10 years, we're going to need a lot of very good sports managers and sports scientists and coaches and technicians and so forth as we head towards the 2032 games.
Okay, let's ask you about then the challenges that you've faced in your roles over the last 18 months due to the pandemic, and how that's potentially changed things for the way you operate and sport operates going forward.
Look, I think, hopefully the pandemic was a one-off, but there are key learnings from that. And I guess the challenge of the postponement of the games, but then the border closures, athletes having to qualify, get around the world. What it did improve, I guess, in terms of benefit is our communication. And that will carry forward. It was very important to provide certainty so that athletes knew that the games were on, they could qualify for them, and they could get to Tokyo, compete at their very best, do the best they possibly can, and get home safely. So it was that certainty to give confidence both to them, to the sponsors, to our sports, to governments, that this is going to proceed. And then that you can't do all this on your own. So it is about coordination. And so it developed the relationships with our sports, our relationship with the athletes as well. Important areas of friends and family are very important to athletes. They're the ones who are doing the supporting for them. So we've developed some strategies now off the basis of having to do things like we're doing today, because the families couldn't go to Tokyo to celebrate their sons and daughters. They had to do it from home. Different ways we're going to be engaged with them and support them as well. So there were a lot of things that we did which we will never repeat again, because I don't really want to go through P for postponement ever again, or P for pandemic. I assure you, we're off to Beijing in February. That's still got a few overtones of P for pandemic, but I greatly celebrated when New South Wales and Victorian government said that you don't have to quarantine if you're fully vaccinated, because bringing the team home, we took about 1,000 people to Tokyo, and brought them home safely without any infections, but I don't want to have to do that again through quarantine and so forth. So onwards to Paris, but as I say, we'll take those learnings with us. A lot of things, as I said, just won't be applicable. And it's interesting, I was talking to the IOC the other night as well about other things, and the learnings from the Tokyo Games were specific to the Tokyo Games, and a lot of them aren't going to be transferable to Paris and LA and Brisbane.
Logistically, Matt, you said it must have been very, very difficult just to actually get the athletes over to Tokyo, albeit with the year's delay. When they were there, though, I suppose you've got a responsibility as well to try and keep them safe, as you say, keep infection out of the Australian camp, and then get them all home safely as well. Do you feel as though, you said you're hoping in future we won't have all this, but I guess COVID-19 is here to stay, isn't it? It's going to become endemic around the world. Do you think that, bubbles and masks and all that sort of stuff, is this going to be with us for a long time in the future? Or do you think at some point over the next 6 months, we will literally return back to what we had pre-2020?
Well, some of that you're probably better off asking one of the many health officials to give you the health advice. Look, I guess in terms of the village, it was very important what we did there, because we wanted to create a performance environment for the athletes. We wanted to create a very welcoming environment for the athletes, and because they couldn't go anywhere else. They weren't allowed to go out in the streets of Tokyo. They could go to their training venues, they could go to their competition venues, and then 48 hours after they finished, they had to get on a plane and come home. So it was very important to establish a warm and welcoming place there in the village in Tokyo. The most valuable player award went to the barista who we imported to be there and serve coffee. The rest of the delegations, the Americans and the Brits and the rest of them in the village, were very jealous and sorry, you can't come in for our barista. But more important things were things like the food service. We developed so the athletes didn't have to go to the dining hall as often, therefore risk infection. So the food service, but we're looking at that, and that might be something we'll continue into Paris, because we'll continue into Beijing, but certainly for Paris, with or without a pandemic, hopefully without. The infection rate, normally you get a lot of gastro, a lot of sore throats, a lot of things of that nature, because of the nature of the village and the athletes and so forth. That was all those sort of infections, which are normal for Olympic Games, were down 98%. So it showed the benefit of keeping your hands clean, distancing, mask wearing, all those sorts of things actually made for a healthier environment for the athletes. So again, yes, you're right. There are key learnings from that. Athletes having to leave the village within 48 hours, in most cases was 24. It took the load off the village. It made the athletes who were still there to compete didn't get distracted, so forth, by those who might be having a bit of a party, which apparently has happened in the past, but I believe that's to Stacey to can fill in the details on that. So we talked about we established a performance committee very early on. We had Peter Condy from the AIS, Kevin Thompson from NSWIS, the neighbours just up the road from ACPE, and some other and Dr. David Hughes, who was critical to, he's the AIS medical director and is also the Australian Olympic team medical director. He was critical to it in the planning that went into it. So I guess there will be a stronger emphasis in all teams going forward on health and also on wellbeing coming home, because we had to develop, obviously, for the quarantine, 14 days to look after the athletes coming back through quarantine and the officials. Again, okay, there mightn't be a quarantine, but we're working through our headspace. Well, perhaps we can do things when the athletes come home, in interaction. Those who've had a good campaign, they're usually pretty good, but there's those who may be disappointed or just missed out on a performance which is important to them. So we have learnt those sorts of things from this pandemic, and we'll implement them in. There's one suggestion though around the 48 hours, came from our performance people. I said, yeah, well, you tell the athletes who are going to be in Paris they have to leave Paris within 48 hours after they're finished competing. Good luck.
Yes. Now let's move away a little bit from the pandemic. I just want to ask you some questions about Olympics, future Olympics going forward. Now, there's a question that's been written here for me. I'm going to take a little bit of issue with it. It says, with numbers decreasing at every Olympics, I'm not sure if that's true, but anyway, that's what the question says. Will team sports such as soccer be phased out in the future? First of all, whoever wrote that, it's football. And secondly, do you think team sports such as football might be phased out? I mean, they're talking about biennial World Cups, which would sort of rule the Olympics out if they introduce that.
Yeah, I think that proposal's got the skids under it at the moment, the biennial World Cup. So I'm led to believe an idea that was floated and currently sinking. No, team sports aren't down to. They have put a cap on the Olympics, 10,000 athletes, but within that, there's a fair bit of capacity. Paris will be totally gender balanced. All the sports will have total gender balance. So the capping it at 10,000 is important. It keeps the costs down significantly. But no, there's no plan to phase out the team sports. The new sports which came in this time, which were all full medal ones, skateboarding, surfing, karate, and sports climbing. Certainly sports climbing and surfing are in for Paris, and I would imagine they'll be there for LA, and they'll certainly be there for Brisbane. Sadly for Stacey's sport of softball, that isn't in Paris. That was softball and baseball was brought back into the Tokyo Games. The IOC allow the host nation or the host organising committee to put forward sports particular for their country, and obviously for Japan, softball and baseball are huge sports, but they're not huge sports in France. So they'll dip out of there, but hopefully they'll be back again for, one would presume, for LA, being the home of baseball and softball. Australia will have the opportunity to put forward sports for those games. The team sports have to have a lot of qualifiers before the games. I think if my memory serves me right, there was only 6 nations who actually attended the games in baseball. It varies with some of the other team sports. Rugby sevens is a bit more, but there's fewer numbers. So it is a matter of managing the numbers, but it's also always important, and I think these games proved it, refresh the games. So your skateboarding and your surfing, the BMX freestyle, refresh the games. I mean, the fact that we picked up 2 gold medals in 2 of those sports was rather nice as well. But they certainly refreshed the games. In Paris, they will have an extra one. And most people, well, I think for ACPE, I was only telling the board the other day, I think it's very important because they do have dance at the ACPE, and breakdancing is in the Olympic Games in Paris. And they brought it into the youth games in Buenos Aires, and it was good. I've been watched it. I mean, it's physical, and as the breakdancers pointed out to me, well, Matt, the Olympic Games have rhythmic gymnastics. It has figure skating in the winter. So what's the difference? Then you also have those horses dancing sideways. So having a bit of breakdancing in the games is going to be good. Now, whether that goes through to LA is entirely up to them. But no, the team sports such as football, they'll continue for sure. The basketball, certainly that they love being part of the games, and many of the team sports have been part of the games for a long time.
I can see you having done a bit of body popping during the 80s, breakdancing. You would have been good at that. I've probably got time for one more question, Matt, before we have to move on. I want to throw it forward. A 2-part question. First of all, if the host nation is allowed to sort of put forward sports, which sports are you considering? I can imagine Gillon McLaughlin has been on the phone already saying it's got to be AFL because that's what the AFL does. And more generally, I imagine this is the start of a very busy period in the lead up to the Brisbane Olympics for you, being the host nation. What sort of things are going to be different for you over the next few years because you're coming up to be a host nation?
Well, I guess I'll answer your first bit first and come to the second bit second. On the new sports, yes, I had a lot of phone calls and letters and expressions of interest from a number of sports. And there was a bit of an expression from AFL, but I think they've worked out that you've got to have more than one country represented at the games.
I knew it.
So that's fine. Certainly, that Stacey Sports obviously is very keen to obviously be part of the games at the home games. Cricket, in the short form. There's a lot of cricket throughout the subcontinent and Africa and other parts of the world as well. So they'll be interested. But we'll cross that. That bridge doesn't get crossed until the end of 2028. So there's a bit of time between now and then. Some sports are trying to go onto the program permanently. In other words, become a permanent feature of the games. And those sports have started that process already. But the sports like squash, there's sports like surf life saving have been lobbying the IOC for some time. Coming back to the second part there, yep, it is going to be very important, but it's very exciting. I mean, this is a 10-year runway into the 2032 games. There's already 30-odd international events scheduled, international sporting events that is scheduled between now and 2032. There's the FIFA Women's World Cup, the FIBA Women's Basketball World Cup, down to small events such as the Four Continents ice skating, which is next year out at Sydney Olympic Park. There's the BMX World Championships are coming through. So there's a whole range of sports over the next 10 years. It's a great opportunity for sport to basically lead the way in many things in what we do. I mean, it's not just about the playing, as you know, Simon. There's the broadcasting, there's the communications, there's the data management. There's a whole lot of industries which can pick up this 10-year boom between now and 2032. We put a submission to the government. We call it 10 plus 10. 10 years into the games and the 10 years after the games. We can start creating legacy now. It's a Paralympic Games as well as Olympic Games. There's great opportunities to help with work with our partners, Paralympics Australia. So for people, the students of ACPE, I just see, this is a once in a generation opportunity in terms of opportunities for your careers and things of that nature. Sports will be gearing up, major events will be gearing up, facility management will be gearing up over the 10 years. So it is a fantastic opportunity. I think because the games now, the new model for the games, where the IOC contributed 1.4 billion towards the cost of the games, nobody wants to build expensive venues anymore. So the cost of the games is actually coming down, not going up, which means more cities are going to be interested in hosting the games. They've got rid of the expensive bidding process. So that is another plus for cities to be involved. So it's not a gift generated opportunity. We'll leave that to FIFA. I shouldn't have said that. So what I mean by all that is that I can't see the Olympic Games coming back to Australia. This will be our third time this side of the end of this century, because other cities are already getting in the queue. And since it's only every 4 years, it's quite remarkable how quickly one's life goes past with 4-year jumps. But it's for the ACPE students, it is a fantastic opportunity.